Here's Archie's Travels, chapter 46, entitled Arm in Arm. Dolly and James walked arm in arm along the promenade, with Archie running in excitedly behind them. His little legs were motoring along as his paws made lovely patterns in the snow. James looked out to the sea and he saw that the waves were rising higher and coming in stronger and faster, and the sun was slowly moving behind the greying clouds. The evening was drawing in and dark shadows were being painted across the canvas of night. The lighthouse seemed to be getting closer, and its beams shone over the sea with angelic grace. Wow, said Dolly, it looks so beautiful, she said, and she gripped James's arm even tighter with excitement. The sound of the crashing waves was getting louder, and Dolly could see a boat bobbing about on the waves like a toy being tossed about effortlessly. There was a colourful beach ball floating on the cold grey sea, and it caught Archie's eye. To him it was like candy, and he immediately ran into the waves and began to doggy paddle towards it. This took James and Dolly by surprise, and before they could react, Archie was on top of the ball and 100 yards out. Archie come back, shouted Dolly, but her shouts were lost in the wailing wind like confetti. What can we do? She exclaimed as she scanned along the deserted beach, hoping that someone could help Archie. James whipped off his coat and jumper, and before she knew it, he was wading into the icy grey water in his purple underpants. Meanwhile, Archie kept pawing the ball, and every time that he did, he pushed it further out to sea. James was a strong swimmer, but it was hard going. The waves were strong, and the distance beneath his kicking feet filled him with dread. He looked up and he could see Archie pushing the ball away. He was about 50 yards away, he thought, and he swam harder, even though he was exhausted. James saw the joy in Archie's eyes as he got closer, and he reached out and grabbed Archie's collar, and he quickly pulled him in the right direction. And then he put his arm around him and swam forcibly back to shore. Dolly watched it all with a mixture of fear and admiration. She didn't want to lose either of them, and she was relieved when they were safely back, looking bedraggled. But James looked back at the ball bouncing farther and further into the sea, and he couldn't help laughing. It was a laugh of relief and exhaustion. Archie was panting wildly, and he was oblivious to the commotion that he had caused. But, but Dolly could forgive him, and she covered him with her thick coat and warmed Archie up. The sky was becoming even darker, but at least the rain had stopped, and they still had to reach the lighthouse. James wasn't one for giving up. What do you think of the day trip so far? He shouted above the whirling wind. It's been interesting, said Dolly, and Archie barked a loud bark in agreement. Eventually they stood below the lighthouse, and its bright lights swept across the sea and the cliffs and gave everything a scary magical glow. Up close it was so much larger and made them feel small and insignificant, and the endless crashing of the waves and the depressing looking sky made her long for home. It had been a good day, but now it was time to leave, she thought wisely. They sat on the bus in silence, and they were all tired. It was very cold, and Dolly snuggled up to Archie like it was a blanket, but Archie was happy about it. Don't the radiators ever come on, she thought, exasperated, before falling asleep. When Dolly finally woke, she looked out at the familiar sights and sounds of home. The Christmas shoppers wrapped against the cold, moving like a multicolored swarm. The big old church clock and the sounds and the sights and sounds of buskers mingling with the church bells. And honking traffic filled the air. It was good to be home, she thought happily. And she could see that James and Archie were thinking the same thing.